Greetings everyone, welcome to video number 11 in a project management series presented by Process Geekoid. Today's agenda will be going over reviewing the PMBOK process table from last time and the 8th process, which is collect requirements process. This process occurs at the intersection of the scope knowledge area and the planning process group. As always, please subscribe, like, and comment. So let's move forward. After creating the scope management plan and requirements management plan from plan scope management, which we talked about in the previous presentation, the next step here is actually gathering all requirements from various stakeholders. So collect requirements is the process we're in. That's what we're trying to do. This is a very critical element of the project and must be very thorough with clear understanding from the business and IT sides of the house. This is typically really important because a lot of the issues in projects is usually the mismatch and miscommunication that happens between the business and the IT side of the house, and requirements are not panned out clearly, resulting in a lot of ambiguous work and a lot of waste and a lot of budget strains and scope strains and schedule strain, and resulting in a lot of pain for all stakeholders. To prevent all this from happening, the requirements have to be panned out clearly initially before moving forward. This is the essence of this project and of the process itself for the project. So this is a very critical element of the project and must be very thorough with clear understanding from the business and IT side of the house. Once requirements are agreed upon and signed off from stakeholders, this is the point of no return from major changes. Keep in mind, change requests can be risen by the team as needed, but having excessive changes can result in scope creep and gold plating. Now, scope creep is externally driven by customers who constantly add new features during a validation session or final sign-off. And the gold plating, on the other hand, is internally driven by the project team, typically by a software engineer or analyst or team member who wants to add nice-to-have features on top of the mandatory requirements, resulting in a situation where the team bites off more than it can chew. The key point here is it can be really difficult to keep changing requirements. You can't keep doing this. So the key point is the requirements must be clear with no ambiguity from the get-go and in planning. Otherwise, a lot of impediments and obstacles will pop up during the execution phase of the project. That's clear. So keep that in mind as we go through this process. So types of requirements. There are many types of requirements for a project as seen here. We have business requirements, which describe the higher level needs of the organization as a whole, such as the business issues or opportunities and reasons why a project has been undertaken, usually the business case or why of the project. Then you have the stakeholder requirements, which describe the needs of a stakeholder or stakeholder group. And then you have the solution requirements, which describe features, functions, and characteristics of the product, service, or result. Functional requirements describe the actual behavior of the product, how the actual product, like the cell phone, how should it work? It needs to have a touch screen, needs to have a power button, application store, etc. Then you have the non-functional requirements that describe the environmental conditions, such as the storage capacity of the phone, or is it in a production environment? What kind of functioning system or the actual system is it in? Is it Android? Is it Apple? Things like that. So non-functional, things that are more environmental within the actual product or service or result. Transition requirements describe the temporary capabilities such as data conversion and training requirements needed to transition from current as-is state to future to be state. This can be an example such as migrating from a test to production environment, usually a one-time move. That's a classic example of a transition requirement. Project requirement describes the actions, processes, etc. that the project needs to be met. Also, most important is quality requirements. You want to meet quality for the customer. You need to meet the voice of the customer requirement by meeting the quality outlined by the customer. So quality requirements are captured as criteria needed to be validated for successful completion of a project. Now, All requirements need to be tied to a specific deliverable, and each requirement needs to be tied to an appropriate resource on a project team. This is accomplished, as you see here, through a requirements traceability matrix. So you see the project name, cost center, where the budget is coming from, project description, the ID of the project, each of the different pieces, each requirement ID tied to each associate or resource in a project, the requirement description, business needs, project objectives, WBS deliverables or work breakdown structure, which is really important. We'll talk about that later. Product design, product development, and test cases. Which part of the requirement is there? That's why you're here. And having the requirements traceability matrix ensures that each requirement is tied to the appropriate resource on a project team, which is accomplished through this matrix. And keep in mind that all requirements are tied to a specific WBS and a scope management plan, which we'll talk about on the next presentation. So next we have RAM, Responsibility Assignment Matrix. This is kind of an add-on to the requirements traceability matrix we just talked about in a previous slide. And the requirements traceability matrix can be intertwined with the RACI matrix. And that is a responsible, accountable, consult, and inform matrix in the resource management plan, which becomes the RAM. So we see the RAM here. We have the roles and responsibilities and the activities and tasks for each person that needs to be done for the project. And the RAM enables a clear view of who is responsible and accountable for each requirement in each deliverable for the project. Keep in mind that there is only one accountable person for each requirement in the project, but there is multiple responsible people and multiple consult and inform individuals, but only one accountable person, and that person is solely accountable for the success of that part of the project requirement. That's really important to understand what that means. And typically the test questions will revolve around the RACI matrix and RAM regarding scope and the requirements traceability matrix. So requirements are crucial. Keep that in mind. Next, we'll be going over the ITTOs for collect requirements. And here we have scope management plan, requirements management plan, stakeholder management plan, project charter, and stakeholder register. Now, all of these make sense because you need to have your scope management plan as your input. You take your plan that you did earlier and your requirements management plan, how you're going to collect the requirements. And then the stakeholder management plan, what kind of stakeholders you're going to have in your process here. And then project charter, because that's what you agreed upon in the start of the project and needs to meet whatever has been signed off in the start of the project, and the requirements have to tie to that overall objective for the project. And then the stakeholder register, which is a list of stakeholders and important information such as expectations from each stakeholder in case the project manager or team needs to contact them. So that's really important to have as inputs. For tools, it looks daunting here, but we have a bunch of techniques basically to collect requirements, and that is interviews, focus groups. Now, focus groups are basically taking like-minded individuals, getting them into a room and asking them what they would like to see in the product, service, or result, and gather those requirements from them so you can get a clear understanding as to what the customer or client is looking for. Then you have facilitated workshops, which can fall under JAD or Joint Application Development, and QFD or Quality Function Deployment workshops, and Voice of the Customer workshops. Now, a JAD session is a facilitated group technique where SMEs, developers, testers, and a project manager develop, test, and document a small piece of a feature or system. Quality function deployment, another type of facilitated workshop. Contrary to the JAD, in this method, a feature or function is developed and deployed so that the users may discover and use it. Voice of the customer, such as auto shows, where potential customers and voices are collected for auto product refinements. So those are all examples of facilitated workshops. Next, you have group creativity techniques. This is nominal group technique, where you take all the requirements from brainstorming and actually prioritize them using numbers. Brainstorming is an unfiltered gathering of ideas. Icebreaker sessions, where you just get the group in together and get the different kinds of requirements. Delphi technique is where you mail experts in the field to get information, usually using a questionnaire. Idea mind mapping, and then which is basically taking all the ideas and mapping them as to see how they would be linked together using an affinity diagram. And then multi-criteria decision analysis, where you're taking all the requirements and be like, which requirements do we need, and basically put them in the criteria and decide which ones you're going to use for the project. Then you have group decision-making techniques, and this could be falling under 4 types. Dictatorship, one person decides what's right, what's not right for the type of requirement. Unanimity, which is basically all parties agree. Majority is greater than 50% rule in a voting session. And basically that means if a question was asked and people voted for a specific feature, greater than 50% results in taking in that requirement for the project. Plurality, it's not encouraged. That's where you have less than 50% and 50% is not required to gain consensus on getting the requirement. This is typically in politics, where requirements, politicians are just there to get requirements and not even meet the needs of 80% or more of the requirements for the customer, which is the overall public. So this is not really useful because it is less than 50% viability, and not everyone has to agree and still goes through, which is not fair. This would violate PMI standards. So, it would be best to use the unanimous technique where everyone agrees rather than taking the other two into consideration. So next we have questionnaires and surveys, observations, and prototypes. Prototypes are typical preliminary model of a software product or feature from which requirements can be drawn from. Then you have benchmarking, context diagrams, document analysis. And these are all the techniques that you use to collect requirements. And that's where we get the outputs. The outputs then become requirements documentation. This could be in the form of a business requirements document. And then you have a requirements traceability matrix, as we saw earlier, which helps track deliverable from initiation to completion and to be able to backtrack to see which customer requirements lead to the production of the final deliverable. That is really important to understand, and the key benefit of this whole process is that it provides the basis for defining and managing the project scope, including product scope. Keep in mind that the product scope needs to be determined before you do the project scope. So in the case of an iPhone, you will be making sure that you get all the requirements for the latest upgrade and that you will do that for the project. Thank you for watching, and keep all of the things in this project process in your mind when you run a project. Collecting requirements is really, really crucial and needs to be done correctly in order to succeed in the project. Thank you for watching this video. I hope it's been helpful. As always, please subscribe, like, and comment, and leave any questions for me. I'll be happy to help you understand it better. Thank you.